Good morning and welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm Justine and I'm your host today. I'm excited to introduce you to David Benzaquen, and he is our guest today. And we also have Yvette here today, and she is with NextGenChef, a passionate marketing analyst about the future of food. But we're excited to have David here. David, I'd love to just chat with you and hear a little bit about your story and how you got where you are today.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Want me to go ahead and
for you to join
jump
us.
in?
Yeah, jump in. I mean, I'd love to just tell our listeners maybe first a little bit about how you and I connected, because I think it's a little bit of a fun story. David and I connected on LinkedIn. We share probably some contacts that overlap, some similar interests and missions that align. And once we got on the phone and we're chatting, we realized we were both from New York City. We both went to schools that probably played sports against each other, went to the same university a couple of years apart, and now circling years back, years later, and ahead, are now in the same industry and trying to share our passion and support people on a mission to change the future of food, which I think is a perfect intro to have David talk to you about himself and really share with him a little bit about how he got where he is today.
Sure. Thank you so much. Love the connections we've shared, and I'm just glad to find people are joining the same space for the same reasons, because we definitely need all hands on deck to fix this system. Fortunately, we're starting to head in the right direction. So I got into this
collaborative conversation, right? I mean, I think that it's not, I can't do it alone, you can't do it alone, we need to work together. And I think this is where we start. So
absolutely. So I got my start on the mission side. I started actually in the nonprofit world, spent about a decade working in animal protection nonprofits around advocating for plant-based eating and working on policy to reform how we raise animals for food and all kinds of work around corporate practices, government policy, and consumer behavior, all in the direction of changing our food systems to protect animals, to improve the environment, and to protect our health. And that's my big passion. I've devoted my life to plant-based living and eating and foods, both as a consumer myself, as a vegan for 22 years, and as a business person who is looking at finding any way I can to advance these foods that I believe can really make less healthy, less sustainable, and sometimes less ethical products obsolete, hopefully. So that's where I devote my career now. After working all those years in the nonprofit world, I came to believe that it was more difficult to change consumer behavior by telling people what to do and by pointing out problems than it would be if we offered amazing, delicious, affordable, and convenient solutions. And so in 2010, after a number of years of studying industry, I started my agency, Plant-Based Solutions. And what I did was I recruited people with strategy backgrounds in large food companies, and I asked them to join me in my firm, where we provided strategy consulting to early stage plant-based consumer products companies like Gardein and Daya, Treeline Cheese, Miyoko's Kitchen, Health Warrior, a bunch of companies, but a lot of them weren't even in market yet when we started working with them. And we worked with them on branding and marketing and strategy, fundraising, everything around the business side, not so much around the operations or products side, but around the business implementation, launch, and scale. And was privileged to have that company for 9 years, had about 150 clients in that time in my agency, sold that business last year to focus on a food startup I had created. Thank you. For some reason or other, I decided to get on the operator side, and I don't know which was the right direction to go. They were both great, both challenging.
What inspired you to go to the operating side?
At a certain point, I felt like I was telling people what to do without necessarily knowing that I could do it myself. And I was surrounded by, fortunately, the people who worked with me were really, really talented and had worked as operators themselves. But I guess I really felt that it was important that I walk the walk. And I also found a huge white space opportunity in the industry where I thought there was a real need. And that was around seafood. When you look at the oceans, when it comes from climate change, human health, or from animal welfare, really the oceans are perhaps as serious as any other part of our ecosystem. And we're just not addressing those crises, particularly with food solutions, as aggressively as I'd like to. You know, you'll see so many companies coming out with the great burger, you know, a great, you know, new non-dairy milk or this or that, but nobody was really touching seafood, or very few were. And the number of fish that are dying is higher. The number of species that are going extinct is much higher in the oceans than on land. The amount of carbon being released from coral destruction is even higher. So I was just really concerned that this industry wasn't being addressed. I can talk as much or as little as you want me to. So I want to make sure it's conversational.
Conversational, and you've given me some good points to pick up on, and I'm really curious. So what was it, or what was that moment when you realized, or where you learned there was a really big problem in the ocean?
Oh man. I don't know what, you know, it actually, I always knew in the back of my mind, but it's just something I hadn't worked on because it's a lot harder to regulate. And when I was working on animal protection issues, there's really very little that can be done around the oceans in advocacy because they're governed by international law and they're really no man's land. No pun intended. You know, there's, you know, as long as you're 200 miles off the coast of any country, nobody has real jurisdiction of how to enforce any laws. And that's why so much fishing is pirate fishing and illegal, and why there's such poor traceability around slavery and about you know, species correctness and everything else. So it was just something that I hadn't had the chance to work on, whereas working on issues around poultry and beef and dairy and eggs was a lot easier on a policy side and as a product side. But after reading the story of my co-founder, I found somebody who had found a culinary solution to the issue, and that's really where I came from. So I met this chef. I read about his story. He had developed plant-based alternatives to raw tuna and other seafood products. And his story really inspired me. The background was, he's an incredibly talented chef. He's named James Corwell. He's a certified master chef, one of only about 60 in the country, and was a runner-up in the Bocuse d'Or. So really like top-notch global chef. And after years of being at the top of the industry, he was sent to Japan on assignment while he was teaching for the Culinary Institute of America. And he went there and he visited a place called the Tsukiji Fish Market. And Tsukiji is the largest fish market in the world. It's renamed now, but the largest fish market in the world. And he saw the most astronomical destruction of the oceans, where they do this daily tuna auction, where they sell 4 million pounds of tuna every single day. And he just realized that it just couldn't be sustainable, even though he wasn't himself a vegetarian or anything else, but he was so motivated by this shocking issue that he decided to dedicate himself to it. And when I found somebody who had created a culinary solution to solving this problem, I was inspired because I knew that I could help take his creation and make it into a business that could expand its impact.
Wow, that must be so amazing. I mean, such an amazing feeling, like, right, to have this idea, to want to solve this problem, to read about him, and then be able to actually take what you'd always dreamed of being able to fix, and then be able to, you know, find a really good, impactful solution.
For sure, and his product made it possible.
Right, and you've talked about the fact that you've done, you know, you've been in policy, and you've been in all these different areas of animal protection. Has this been something you've been interested in ever since you could talk, walk, and eat?
Pretty young. I've always been passionate about social good and about every aspect of social good, from human rights and feminism and sustainability and everything else. I think what really inspired me around animal protection is the fact they're truly voiceless, at least to us, and the sheer numbers, but also more than anything, it's the fact that so many issues tie together at the intersection of plant-based eating and living. You know, when you think about the fact that, you know, our diet is the #1 reason for most of our major diseases, from heart disease, diabetes, cancer, etc. You know, one of the #1 causes of climate change is animal agriculture. And, you know, when it comes to animals, more animals are harmed for food than for all other industries combined many times over. So in world hunger, you know, the amount of grain efficiency, the amount of caloric efficiency when we feed all these plant foods to animals just to get the animals in a much smaller amount of protein later, it's just inefficient. So in every aspect of every social issue I could think of, it was an area where I could have a real impact. And what really inspired me was I met somebody who I asked them how I could get involved in their organization. I was actually going to a club fair for all these student organizations, and it was the anti-death penalty club and the feminist club and the this club and the that club.
Was it AU?
And I loved it was at AU.
Was it?
And yeah, and I loved what they were all doing. And but I would ask them, what do I do if I'm in your club? And they'd say, oh, we sign petitions, we write letters, we protest. And I asked the woman who was leading the animal protection club what she'd do. She'd say, are you vegan? I said, no, I'm vegetarian. She'd say, well, we'll help you go vegan. You'll save another 50 some odd lives every single year. And then every single person you help encourage to move in that direction will save exponentially. And as somebody at 18 years old, as somebody who wanted to feel empowered and feel that I could actually make a difference, the idea that I was going to protest against the Iraq war with George Bush as the president felt kind of futile. I did it, but I didn't exactly feel like I was going to convince him. But the fact that I personally, just the power of my fork and my dollar, could save animals and improve my health and the environment was so, so empowering. And so that's why I got into it. And I was inspired and I haven't turned back.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Yvette, I know I think I cut you off before when you were just about to ask a question. So I want to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, I was going to add two things to David's story behind Ocean Hugger. So one thing is he mentioned the infamous tuna auction in the largest Japanese fish market. Now that really just highlights why this is such a wide space, right? Because you can choose a variety of species to create analogs of, sardine, skipjack tuna, but those are of very low value. Whereas tuna, especially ahi tuna, the larger kinds, are so expensive. And that's really the business incentive to get into the space. You need that to build a sustainable business. So I just agree that is a really brilliant idea. And another thing, in addition to, you also mentioned that animals don't have a voice to advocate for themselves. That is particularly true for fishes. It's easier to empathize with things that have a face that looks remotely mammalistic, or like chicken. But for fish, they kind of, or even like lobsters, they look a little like alien species monsters. You know, it's hard to empathize with them. That's intuitive. What's counterintuitive is the stats that the vast amount of fishes in the world and how they the numbers that die collectively, even if they have a trace of conscience, that just overshadows the chickens and the pigs that die relative of quite a low quantity. So I think you identified a really nice white space. I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I mean, about we assume about 100 million cows a year are killed for food in the United States, but about 50 billion sea animals. So when you consider the numbers, it's just astronomical. And absolutely, when your point about the economic opportunity was a great one, and it's a big part of what I was interested in about this business also, was the fact that I felt that we could really be impactful because we could disrupt the industry on a financial way. I'm motivated by mission. However, I do believe that using the markets effectively means making it viable and profitable for all involved. And by using commodity ingredients like tomatoes, because the incredible technology my colleague developed, by using commodity ingredients like tomatoes and eggplants to replace $35, $40 a pound tuna and unagi, which are endangered, just getting less popular because of sustainability concerns, among the most toxic fish in the oceans because they contain the most mercury, because they get all the mercury from the smaller fish below them, and are just outrageously expensive because they're so endangered. Suddenly I could sell something at a fraction of the price that could create the same culinary experience. So being able to disrupt on price is a rarity in plant-based, and it was a really, really nice opportunity to get into the supply chain and make a lot of people really happy along the way. So we have chefs and distributors and restaurateurs who were thrilled because they could make the dollar on it while making an impact.
So out of curiosity, a lot of people are talking about the plant-based movement, right? It's a hot topic, and people are talking about sustainability and building a regenerative culture. And as I look around, I'm talking, this is New York, San Francisco, these large metropolises where people are forward thinking. but what does that look like inside the rest of the world and inside the middle of the country? And, what are your thoughts on how this is going to play out for, how is it, what does this look like for the future of it?
Sure, I think we have to look at the global perspective and the domestic perspective very differently.
Right.
First of all, we have to recognize that for the vast majority of human history, and still today, the vast majority of the world's population is largely plant-based, and they have to be largely plant-based because that is what they can find and what they can afford. So with the exception of the fact that there is a large population in the world that is dependent on seafood right now because they're coastal fishermen, who frankly are being damaged by the corporate fishing industry. But with the exception of that, most of the global south in the world is right now largely plant-based because meat is hard to store, hard to maintain, hard to catch, and expensive to farm. And so the very Americentric, meat-centric diet is something that is only in existence for the last 70 years. It's really, World War II ended, we had this massive industrial revolution, we had railways and all kinds of industry that had been put together for munitions, and I had no idea how to utilize that. And it was an opportunity for the food industry to speak to women who wanted to stay out of the home and because of the workforce, because they'd been in the workforce, and make foods more convenient and make foods more affordable, and speaking to this very individualistic consumer culture that came from not having to want anymore, right? We're post-depression, we're post-war, we're finally able to celebrate our being a superpower as a country and start to live it up a little bit and celebrate capitalism in its purest form. And suddenly that means that we get what we want, how we want, when we want it, damn all the circumstance, all the impacts. And we didn't know about a lot of them, which led to, the tobacco culture and everything else we had. And, the amount of meat and dairy and eggs that we eat in this country, additionally to all the salt and sugar and fat and everything, is so astronomical that it never is sustainable. It never was, and it never would be. And the fact that there are some cultures who are following in our footsteps is really scary. And I hope that we're able, in China and India in particular, and I hope we're able to mitigate that with the new learnings we have around the health impacts and sustainability impacts. But I think that in terms of the plant-based foods industry, the reason I bring that up is because there is a real role to look at technology and the future of foods to undo some of the damage we've done and to offer solutions that can enable people to transition away from the things we've gotten so used to. Right. But there's also just the fact that there are millions and millions of delicious crops that we can be incorporating back into our diet every day, as most of the world is, and then we benefit from doing so. And so I think we don't have to hope that Ghana suddenly becomes impossible food kingdom to be a sustainable plant-based world, or to be an ethical world, or anything else. We can understand that can exist in multiple factors. I do also, however, think that the adoption of these kinds of progressive foods in this part of the world is just the beginning. And one of the things that I've been speaking a lot about is that in the next 5 years, we're going to see a major acceleration in Asia. And I think it's most necessary there. And I think the BRIC countries are where we need to see the biggest advancement in plant-based. And I think we're going to. I think Brazil, India, China, and to an extent Russia, but particularly Brazil, India, and China are going to see massive growth in these areas, and a big transition from seeing these foods as coming from a place of faith or from a place of restriction and aestheticism to coming from a place of abundance and celebrating the vibrancy of being able to live your fullest self and of living in communally with the resources that we have abundantly to us. I think it's a real change of mindset. Mm-hmm. And the way I think of it, even as a Western consumer, is when I first went vegetarian or vegan, I thought I'd be limiting my diet. And I think that's the assumption that everybody makes. But when you've grown up with your dinner plate usually being 80% one of 3 or 4 different kinds of protein in the center of the plate, and then 20% 1 or 2 kinds of starch, that's not a diet. That's really, really limiting. And when I went vegetarian or vegan, my horizons expanded dramatically. The amount of different foods I eat now is so much greater. My health is so much better, and I really enjoy textures and flavors that I never knew were there. I think that's true for a lot of people. So, I think that the future of food and how we move this industry forward is a combination of celebrating the old and the new, and knowing that the one thing we can't do is continue treating the earth, the animals, and our bodies as commodities to be used up as quickly as possible, because we're doing it to all three the same way.
I would, it's interesting. We've had a couple of conversations with regards to farming and all sorts of things that relate to food and the future of food. And people are going back to the way they did things so long ago. So you're not the first person to mention that or to say that. And it's really, it's I think, a common thought now about how we have to rethink and reframe what we're doing. And a natural question, at least for me, is how has COVID played into this in terms of, where we were going beforehand, where we were headed, and now where we're headed. And has this derailed us in a good way, in a bad way? It's affected the supply chain. It's affected so many different things. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. I mean, there are so many impacts, some of which flow together, some of which are complete contradictions to each other. Among them, I've seen a tremendous reluctance to eat things like raw fish, which, certain kinds of other animal proteins that would be seen as particularly prone to foodborne ailments, which I understand. It also, unfortunately, means that those of us who are dependent on those industries can be impacted by that. Mm-hmm. So ironically, even more than any other kind of animal protein analog, my company sold so intentionally and so clearly and exclusively alongside the products we were disrupting, because we were selling in places where people eat raw fish, which is really in those restaurants, that with that industry suffering, our businesses had to shift a lot too. And we're actually in the process of restructuring to launch next year with a new set of products, or at least an expanded set of products, and possibly different channel variety. So we're not just in food service.
Before you go on, can you tell me a little bit about that? Because it's really interesting to see where people are changing and pivoting.
Sure. I mean, I can say that, when we started Ocean Hugger Foods, we knew that we were focusing on premium raw and smoked fish alternatives. And those products are almost exclusively eaten, prepared, and found outside of the home. 96% of sushi is eaten outside the home. I'm guessing that for poke, it's even higher. For tartare and sashimi and ceviche, these aren't foods the average American is preparing at home. And one of the reasons, when I've seen the consumer research, is that people are intimidated about the idea of handling raw fish at home because they're scared of getting sick. So while our products are vegetables, we still had to overcome the fact that people hadn't learned how to make those foods. And when it comes to launching new products, one of the most important things is understanding the usage occasion and the meal occasion. How are people encountering these products? How are they fitting them into their lives? And teaching a new behavior is extraordinarily hard. And so rather than saying, let me teach you how to roll sushi and then let me convince you to not put fish in it, we felt that it made more sense to sell at the restaurant where people were going to go for it anyway. And to say, now you can go even when you're friends with you because they can have this while you can have that. And it made a lot of sense. Unfortunately, with COVID, the restaurant industry really suffered, and we were very dependent on that. We were also very focused on a lot of success in institutional food service, like massive adoption in colleges and corporate offices. Also two areas that did not fare well in the beginning of COVID. So we've had to think about expanding into retail and other environments where we're seeing not only not loss, but actually massive growth in plant-based. So you asked about the changes. We were a very rare casualty. The reality is that plant-based as a whole is exponentially growing because of COVID in some ways. People are turning against animal protein because they saw what happened with transmission of foodborne illness of illness from animals to humans, and it's not the first time, and it won't be the last. It's estimated that the vast majority of 24-hour bugs or stomach flus, which are not really things, are actually foodborne pathogens. And so we're seeing a lot of that. And so people are turning against that. People are looking for cleaner foods because they're more and more concerned about their health. We actually have a dichotomy where some people reverted to like a junk food diet when they were at home and just eating microwavable meals and chips, and other people were like, maybe this is the time to start taking care of myself. As somebody who was in near lockdown here in New York for months, I've never walked as much as I did when I finally realized that I wasn't allowed to do it much. So like as soon as I could only leave my house for a short while, I took very, very clear advantage of that. And my 10,000 steps became very important to me. I wanted to be safe, but I also needed to be safe up here.
So we're going to take a short break right now, and then we'll be right back with David, and we're going to have a little advertisement from our sponsor. Thanks so much. I want to thank today's sponsor, NextGenChef. NextGenChef feeds members with the knowledge and tools that they need to create concepts with purpose and succeed. If you're listening today, they are offering a 1-year subscription for any new founder that wants to participate at a special discounted rate. For more information, email team@nextgenchef.com. If you're interested in becoming a member or just a part of the community, email NextGenChef at team@nextgenchef.com. You can also follow them on Instagram at NextGenChef, as well as on LinkedIn and on Facebook. Thank you again, NextGenChef, for making this podcast possible. Together, we can change the future of food.
Thank you so much. So with COVID, we've seen more demand for plant-based foods, more time spent at home cooking and getting to know the foods we're eating. And also, at least in my family and many others I've heard, there's a return to the dinner table. There is more time being spent at the dinner table with loved ones, cooking and eating together in a communal way.
So are you experiencing this yourself?
I am. Yeah, as a single dad, I'm finally taking the time to be able to spend time with my son at the dinner table.
Wow.
And that's really valuable time. It's, I grew up in a very European household where dinner for me
was it 9 o'clock?
Fortunately not, but it was like at 7:30. I never understood the 6 o'clock dinner thing.
Mine was at 9.
Yeah, my cousins and aunts and uncles in Spain certainly at least that late. So I can relate to that. But dinner for me was always a home cooked meal, always was some kind of lean protein, some kind of whole grain, and some kind of salad. And fruit was the dessert 90% of the time. Always salad on the plate. Always, a lot of different whole food ingredients and nothing processed. And it always meant that everybody was responsible for participating. I had to set the table, I cleared the dishes, right? Somebody cooked. Everything that my mother did. Fortunately, she was very generous with her time in the kitchen. But that time at the dinner table was spent not only eating really healthy food, but also spending so much time on social, emotional, and intellectual development. At a very young age, I was being encouraged to spend that time speaking about how my day was, talking about what I learned, discussing current events, openly experiencing that conversation over breaking bread, literally. And I think we've lost that. And I knew that when I went to friends' households that were much more American in style, where, when I'd have a sleepover, the kid would say, "Let's go get frozen cheeseburgers out of the freezer, stick them in the microwave, and then we'll all sit down in the front of the TV with our trays and look straight ahead of the TV." Father, mother, son, and friend.
No.
And I'm like,
seriously?
Absolutely. And I did that tons of times. It was very confusing to me because I'd never experienced that.
I never experienced that either.
Yeah, very, very, very common though. So I think COVID is actually allowing us to recognize and appreciate the time that is so valuable in being with our food and being with our loved ones. And that kind of slow food philosophy, I think, does so much for our mental health and our physical health.
You know what's interesting though, as you're sitting there talking about your experience when you were growing up, I'm sitting here remembering mine, right? And I grew up, my parents were divorced, and my mom ran her own business in Chelsea, and my dad had his own business, and we had an au pair, and and my mom would give me $20 every day to go to school, and I'd use it on cab fare because I was always late. So I'd come home and I was allowed to use the credit card for emergencies. So this qualified as an emergency because I was hungry, right? So I would order my $6.95 Chinese lunch, okay? Or I'd go to the grocery store, or the au pair would make me a curry or some sort of food, or I'd have leftovers from my mom made chicken and vegetables and, whatever it was. but we would eat late because my mom was working. But we would sit down and we'd have chicken and we'd have broccoli and we'd have, you know, a nice meal. And it was not in front of a TV, and it was around the big table, and we'd all eat together. And even when I'd go to my dad's house on Friday nights, we'd all eat together. It was a thing. And even now I incorporate that into my life, and I can't imagine not doing that. I feel like it's a tradition, it's part of culture, it connects you. And I think that food, it's rooted in food, because, and if you're cooking it and you're thinking about what you're putting on the table and making it beautiful and thoughtfully, you know, putting the ingredients together from the herbs to the, it's you know, it's mindfully done, it's thoughtfully done. And so I think it goes back to what you're saying about sort of, if we're trying to build a sustainable and regenerative food system and thinking about the future of food, and we bring it back to family, and we talk about the values that we want to introduce to our children at a young age. Like, I don't know, how old's your son?
5.
He's 5. Okay. He's 5. And you know, to bring him into the kitchen and to participate and to cook with him, and he starts to be part of this tradition. Not, I don't mean it in a religious way. I mean it sort of just as in a cultural way. That it starts to be part of his value system. And if we could start to change that, we can start to change the future of food.
Absolutely.
I think that's equally as important as we look at the future of food and all the innovations that people are building. So I'm glad to hear that you're doing that with your child, because that's so nice. The only children I have bark. So, yeah.
Well, I am invested in a new plant-based fresh pet food delivery company. If you're interested in looking at that.
Ooh, tell me more about that. I mean, we do make our own pet food. Like, we chop up the carrots. We chop.
That's what this is, exactly. Yep. It's becoming more and more popular. So this company is doing that, but with a special protein blend and with a lot of different awesome fresh.
What's the name of it?
It's called Bramble. The website is bramblepets.com.
Okay.
And,
no, I mean, I've
amazing
been
company just launching now.
They're just launching now in New York, or where? In New York. Okay.
In New York. Yeah, my dog loves this.
Okay. Do they deliver out here? Can we get some samples to try?
I'm not sure where the reach is yet. But
okay, we've tried Nom Nom. Do you know Nom Nom?
I don't.
We've tried Just Food for Dogs. Have you heard of them? It's made.
No, this is the first one I've tried, and I've been thrilled with it.
Well,
so I haven't.
Do you have a dog?
I do.
Oh, you do? Okay, so at least you have a dog.
Well, I tried it too, though. Actually, I did actually taste it. It tasted bland.
Well,
you know.
The thing is, it's like.
But it's whole vegetables, so I don't care. It's not something bothering.
It's all people food.
Yeah.
It's all people food.
Yeah, I mean, it's sweet potato and lentils and brown rice and chickpeas and stuff.
Check out Just Food for Dogs too, because they have a kitchen where they prepare it all. I mean, just you can look online and you can go in, and I take the dogs to the treats, and they're preparing it as if you're in the kitchen and you're there with the chef. It's kind of fun. My dogs love to go because they get sweet potato chips and all sorts of things. But in any case, we've kind of digressed, and I don't want to take up, I want to get back on track a little bit and just, kind of just finish up with a couple last questions. I know Yvette has a couple, and just talk a little bit about what you hope, the impact you hope to have on the future of food. Maybe we'll start with that, and then I think Yvette has a couple others that we'll close out with, if that's okay with you.
Sure. So when I came into the business world, as I told you, my thesis was that I could have a greater impact by making delicious products more widely available, more desirable, and creating those solutions and offering them to people so that the alternative would be completely obsolete, right? I don't want people to say, why should I want people to say, why shouldn't I, right? Oh, well, why shouldn't I eat this when it's just as good, just as cheap, even healthy, right? And I guess, and this was a number of years ago, before the plant-based industry was quite what it is today. There certainly was nobody on the service provision side. They were obviously entrepreneurs who were starting in this space, but it was around the same time that some of these pioneers, well, not the earliest plant-based pioneers, but this new generation of plant-based pioneers were coming out with their food companies, that I got into this service side of the business. And I guess if somebody could tell me what my epitaph could read, I would want to say that he was one of the people who made plant-based an industry, because I admire and thought of Danny CEO, who really created the green business movement as an idea. He really advanced sustainability by working with Martha Stewart and others to show that something could be green and actually be a great profitable business. I'm not in it because of the business, but I do believe in the power of these tools to advance this movement. And I would love to feel that that was the impact that I had, that I was able to move the concept of plant-based from a political ideology that was for the niche to a part of our food industry that was the norm and that enabled so much innovation, so much more capital, so much more growth of this super impactful space.
I'm on the bandwagon. You got my, I'm there. Let me know what I can do. Well, I think that's a great mission, and I'm there with you, and anybody we can help to rally around and take it to the next level, you let me know.
We need everybody.
Yeah, exactly. It's a movement. And I think that, it's interesting. I feel like while there's a lot of people that are part of this movement, we still need so many more. I mean, people are talking about this, yet you go to, New York has a bunch of plant-forward restaurants or plant-based restaurants, but you come here to San Francisco, there's maybe like one.
There's nothing. Yeah.
And you go to LA, there's a couple.
Shout out to Shizan, right?
Yeah, so close to me. It's right there.
Oh, jealous. It's the one, basically.
They don't exist here the same way, and even in New York, there's just a few. I mean, what was it? Which
Not
is the one
anymore. There are now over 150 entirely vegan restaurants in New York City.
Okay, so there was, wherever there was, the first one was on right by Irving. It was, oh my God, and they closed. It was around the corner from Lucky Duck. It was on Irving.
Oh, Pure Food and Wine.
Pure Food and Wine, and now they have the ex-husband or boyfriend has the restaurant now in LA.
He has a bunch in New York as well. Yeah.
Yeah, which I love. They have that same amazing lasagna, but it's just, there's a lot in New York. It just needs to expand elsewhere. Anyway, Yvette, I know you've got some other questions, but I want to make sure that you get to be able to ask them and participate in this conversation.
Totally. So David, you mentioned that you have a focus on marketing, branding, and consumer insights, and a strategy consulting. So why don't you share a couple of tips coming from that background with plant-based entrepreneurs?
Sure. Okay. So first, I think that because I meet so many mission-driven entrepreneurs, they can frequently be reluctant to invest in some of the things that are really needed to make sure they're sitting on the right path. And I'm a big believer in getting ready and preparing and knowing where you're heading before you jump. I know that sometimes we have to take leaps, and I'm not somebody who's scared to jump into the deep end. I have many times based on the businesses I've been in, but it always concerns me when somebody says, oh, I don't want to spend $10,000 on those consumer insights or on that business plan because I need it for sales. Okay, but if the product you sell is $1 more than it should have been and you've just turned off 80% of the market, it'd be a real waste of your next $1 million that you spent trying to succeed with that. Or if that flavor was too spicy for most people, or if the packaging didn't stand out because you put a coconut water on the shelf with green, blue, or white like every single other coconut water brand. If you don't prepare to learn how people are going to react to something, if you don't get that reaction, if you don't test things and understand what's going on out there, do the competitive analysis, do the marketing landscape, then you're really going to risk wasting a lot of money and time and possibly losing the relationships that you could have built with the right path, right? So what I do is, rather than convincing a retailer to carry a product before I'm ready and then having it fail and then having them not want to work with me again, I'll go and form a relationship with them where I'll say, I am interested in doing something in this space. Here's what I'm thinking. I'd be really grateful if you'd give me your feedback, since you're on the front lines. You see what people are looking at. Could you tell me what you think of this packaging? Would you help me in developing something that would you give me feedback so that I can develop something that your customers would like and it would make us both money? And I think by engaging partners in the process and making sure that when we go into the market, we're making it successful for all of us, we can really prevent a lot of problems and succeed much more effectively. The other thing is, I've mentioned this before and everybody knows it, but taste, price, and convenience govern all purchasing decisions. I'm a passionate plant-based consumer, and I have been for many, many years. And yet I still think with my mouth, my taste buds, and my wallet, and I have to, and my time, because they're just realities. And when people go to the supermarket, they have a limited space in their basket, and so only so much they can carry home. They've got only a certain amount of time, and they've got limited amount of money in their wallets, and they're having to make a decision on a few things. And so we can't just assume that because our stuff is different, that it's the thing that everybody's going to buy. You know, I tell people white space isn't necessarily isn't always a bad thing. You know, chocolate couches were new, and it doesn't mean that people should buy them, that they would. So we have to understand, is this different? And then is it something people actually want? And taste, price, and convenience are how we go around that. We can care so much about a product. We need to have those stories. We need to be authentic about what we are. And I do not have any interest in working with a company or buying from a company that is just making stuff because, or just because they want to make money. But they also need to make me happy, right? I tell people that as somebody who cares so much about social justice, I'm probably wearing clothes right now that were made in sweatshops. And not because I'm a jerk. I'm doing it because it can be hard to spend the time and gather the education and the knowledge and spend the money and, you know, find the clothing that I like, that fits me, that meets all the ethical standards I like. So when somebody's not eating plant-based, it doesn't mean they're bad. It means that they haven't, I feel like it's my responsibility, my failure that I haven't made the products to lure them in yet. And so we have to be willing to understand things with and meet consumers where they are. We have to make products that excite their taste buds and are convenient and easy for them to engage with and try and enjoy, and that they can afford, so that we can invite them on this journey. Another thing I'd say is that sales dictate a lot, or sales really tell the truth. So I often hear from entrepreneurs who are convinced that their products and everything about their brand and their products is perfect. And they do have people frequently, those friends and family frequently tell them how great everything is. But then when the sales reports come out, the numbers aren't good. And they're reluctant to hear that because they're thinking, well, everybody tells me it's great. Everybody loves it. And people seem to love it. Everybody tells me it's so good, so good, so good. And I tell them, sales tell the truth. Something is not working. And so when they tell me all I need is more money for marketing, because I invest in companies as well. And when they tell me all I need is more money for marketing, because if more people know about it, then they'll be more successful. I say, taking more money is just fuel on a fire. But if that spark isn't right, it's not going to go anywhere. Right. You need to have the foundation right. It's like when people tell me, yes, my gross margins are bad, but eventually they'll get better. Is it possible that you'll get efficiencies in your ingredients? Sure. Is it also possible that they're so low that you're never going to make money, that spending more money to make and sell more of those items is a worse idea than just stopping? Yes, it's very possible. We have to be honest with ourselves. And being scared to pivot is missing the point. If something is not working, it means there's an opportunity to fix it. It doesn't mean that you fail. Everybody fails if we see everything that we didn't know yet as failure. So we all have to pivot. Ocean Hugger has to pivot from being exclusively food service focused to being more channel diversified. And that doesn't mean we failed. We made some really good decisions. They made a lot of sense at the time. And now the market has changed and we have to adapt. And rather than thinking this was the way I was going to do it, and so that must be right, and then, you know, holding ourselves up in a, digging ourselves into a hole and burying ourselves and not doing anything about it, we could be pivoting and discovering even more success and impact. And so I wish that every mission-driven entrepreneur would remember why they're doing what they're doing and focus on that end result, and be willing to learn what it takes to get there. Because being responsive to the market, being responsive to the consumer and to what wins in the marketplace is how you have impact. If you want to have impact, you got to sell your stuff. That means it's got to be the best out there. It's got to compete with the others, because that's how you make money to grow it. That's how you sell more. That's how you stop the other stuff from being easy to sell.
Yeah, that's really empowering and has a lot of insights in those. So to give our listeners a little recap, David shared that marketing is really important, and not just spending on digital ads blindly. but including the market research piece, incorporate that into consumer interviews, testing and learning, and product development, and also to focus on all stages of marketing rather than just building the awareness, but how many of your customers are converting, which is sales, as David pointed out. And lastly, the really empowering piece to be brave enough and decisive enough to pivot into new channels, which could really mean an optimistic outcome to venturing into new spaces. And this might be a little cliche example, but I'm gonna think of Impossible Foods, that they have been very food service centric before the pandemic, and they pivoted to retailers, and now I can find Impossible Food meat in Sprouts, and it's a short amount of time, but that's really strategic and brave. Yeah, so you're glad that Ocean Hugger is doing the same. Can't wait to see you near us.
Me too. Thanks.
Yes, we can't wait to try.
Thank you. Yeah, it's delicious stuff. I'm so excited. I'm still excited that I have some left in my house that I can make it myself. I had the product so I can make my own sushi and such because I'm actually trying to learn that.
Well, have you ever heard? Just a quick thought. Have you ever heard of? It's called Carrot Locks.
Yes.
You have heard. So you have heard of it. There's a woman out here that does that in San Francisco. You've heard of her?
Mm-hmm.
So I had never heard of her before, and when she first got started, because she was a chef beforehand and then started doing that. And she did one of our happy hour events before we pivoted and we're doing happy hours, and people just loved it.
Yeah.
It just took off like gangbusters, and she went into all the co-working spaces, and she was doing Uber Eats, I think, in DoorDash. So I think there's a huge market for those types of things, and people love them. I just think here in this area, people are just not as familiar with it.
Yeah, we have to educate, and the biggest thing is getting in people's mouths.
Exactly, tasting it.
Yeah, we talked about, this is not meant as a plug, but just to jump ahead of what I'm doing now, because it's actually kind of relevant to what we're talking about now. I've been looking at specifically some pain points in the industry that I'm in and where some brands are struggling because of a lack of resources they have, not just financial resources. So I've actually been forming two companies. One is going live in a couple weeks. We're now in the very beginning of October, so mid-October, if you're hearing this then. And that's called Moonshot Collaborative, moonshotcollaborative.com. It's a consumer research panel focused entirely on plant-based shoppers. And so it's a great way to test what products will be successful, what brands will be successful, and how to hear from consumers themselves if they actually wanted to buy something. And the other business that I'm launching is around specifically driving trial. In the time of COVID, it's really, really hard to get samples in people's mouths. No stores are wanting you to cook something and serve it open air into people, and nobody wants to eat it that way anyway. And so I'm working with somebody to launch a company to be able to get samples into people's homes that your core consumers could try them and give you feedback on them.
That's great, and we should have another conversation offline about that, because there might be an opportunity for collaboration with some of our founders that are building some of those vegan products that are shelf stable, and we're looking for some opportunities, and we're targeting. We'll have to see who we're targeting, who you're targeting, and see what opportunities we can find middle ground to maybe connect over.
Absolutely. I will say that one of the very distinguished things about this company is that we're actually looking to do, in addition to shelf stable, a lot of refrigerated and frozen.
Oh,
and we'll probably be one of the only ones doing that.
We have lots of those. We just didn't have a way necessarily to do that. So that could solve this problem for many of our founders. So
I was speaking to an entrepreneur in your area who's an investee of mine, a company called Hooray Foods.
Oh, I know Hooray Foods.
Sri, okay, so Sri is awesome, and Hooray is in my portfolio. And I was talking to Sri about the fact that, with good reason, because this product is amazing, he got approved to go into Whole Foods, but they can't do demos. And when you're in those retailers, they expect, understandably, that you have to hit a certain volume of sales per week, or else you're taking up shelf space from something else that could be doing better. And they'd rather make more money. And so if you're not going to do it, they're going to bring in a more established brand that has more awareness and people are already willing to buy. And that means that the newer, most innovative, more impactful stuff isn't going to survive. And so it was speaking to him that made me realize that we needed a new way to get refrigerated and frozen products into people's hands and mouths. And so what I'm doing is actually I'm launching the first monthly subscription box for refrigerated plant-based products. And
Okay,
so
awesome.
the brands, they can put in free samples into these product and packages. The consumer gets these things. Every month they get to try new things. And then we have an online marketplace where they can go and get them or find out where they can buy them in person. So it's looking at things like that, like what Sri's going through and what other entrepreneurs are going through that I'm trying to solve for.
We've been trying to solve a similar problem in a different way, similar, but different. And the last time I saw Sri, he was sampling his product at our holiday party because he was one of our founders that was there.
Nice.
So
so good.
We did the holiday party with SFCPG with Daniel Schreier. I don't know if you know him. And with who is it? Oh my God, National, I forget their name. Anyway, it was in December. It was great. And he was there and we had a lot of great brands. But we've got a lot of different people like Garlic Goodness and, Local Foods and a lot of them that we've been trying to put together our own box. And we should really talk about this because there could be a lot of opportunity. I don't necessarily need to do it, but maybe there's a way we can solve the problem.
And vice versa.
Too. You know what I mean?
Vice versa. I'm not looking to reinvent any wheels either. I've got my hands in plenty of things.
Exactly. So, but anyway, I really appreciate your time on this call and on this, and sharing all this information with our listeners. I think that sharing your story was both inspirational and aspirational. I think your insights on changing the future of food and what you're doing and the initiatives you're working on are really going to take us into the future of food. And I hope that our listeners will be inspired and reach out if they want to connect with you and your new businesses and leverage those resources. I hope you'll download our app and connect with some of our founders at the NextGenChef app. It's a tailored LinkedIn, if you will, so you can connect with them one-on-one. And to our listeners, take this opportunity to connect with some of our guests here on the Essential Ingredients podcast. So thank you, David, for joining us. Thank you, Yvette, for joining us. Thank you, our listeners, for joining us. If you like this podcast and you want to hear more, please subscribe to the Essential Ingredients channel, and we will hope to see you here again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.